Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Pereira. I'm currently in California studying law at Santa Clara University. I joined GAEIA in 2021 while studying philosophy at Cal Poly, and I was working with the climate change group with the first cohort, and I've been working with Elise and Soren to develop the program for today. So thank you to all of our wonderful speakers, and I'm pleased to introduce two more of our GAEA colleagues who will share some of their independent research. First up, we'll have Kelsey Nabin, who's an ethnographic researcher who received a PhD at RMIT's University Center for Excellence for Automated Decision-Making and Society. Her research is applied in various settings via peer-reviewed publications, industry projects with professional services, firm block science, and policy contributions. Next up, we'll have Caesar and his colleague Natalie Buslan, who are both doctoral researchers at Pompeu Fabra University. Their research focuses on the potential for algorithmic discrimination in automated hiring services and how best to avoid those harms. So first up, we'll have Kelsey.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. And thank you so much, Christine, and all the previous speakers. I concur that it's been wonderful to join and just listen in. I think you set me up very well for a conversation about infrastructure when you were speaking about both software and hardware. So I'm going to do the thing and try and share this and make it play from the start, which is not coming up for me. Sorry, I've lost the button to play the slideshow. This one. Okay, can I get a thumbs up if that works? Brilliant. I'll get straight to it. I've got way more slides than time. I kind of want to give you a broad brush. And again, I'm really grateful to Elise and Soren as well for inviting me. I was like the worst participant of the whole GAEA cohort, largely due to what was mentioned before about time zones. I'm originally based in Australia, which is not a convenient time to coordinate with Europe and the Americas, and was finishing my PhD. In saying that, I'm really grateful to kind of align myself with the GAEA project and mission and talk about some of my research, past and ongoing. So some of that has been mentioned in terms of interdisciplinary research. I'm a social scientist, so I guess the way that I see my contribution and looking, I really like what people have said about the kind of very grounded, practical, real world uses of technology in disaster response, in, human kind of everyday recovery and activities and so forth. I'm particularly interested in looking at emerging technologies. I was going to focus more on AI in this presentation, but some people have covered that quite eloquently. So I might focus a bit more on blockchain, and I'll zoom through the AI stuff a little more, but happy to chat about it afterwards with anyone that's interested. And I understand kind of looking at the social dynamics that shape, govern, and of course, the people that are impacted and impact upon these technologies as my kind of role as an ethnographer, which is a fancy word for a kind of type of anthropology, but really just observing people, not just what they say, but also what they do, and kind of trying to participate in these systems and understand some of what they're about. So my thesis research was on resilience in decentralized technologies. It was shaped in the context of blockchain, but actually I looked at a number of different protocols, a data storage protocol called IPFS, a decentralized autonomous organization, which was a crowdfunding platform called Gitcoin, and open hardware, so a project called Kong that is trying to manufacture and distribute open hardware chips, to Christine's point before about where all the software runs and how it runs. And so this was motivated, originally actually I was looking at peer-to-peer communication networks in disaster response, and sort of ended up looking at this, so how people kind of adapt and transform in threat or crisis or opportunity, and in line with their purpose using technologies. And in very brief, the thesis is submitted, not yet passed, but I'd love to publish and share that with you when possible. My findings were primarily about this idea of self-infrastructuring. So especially in decentralized technologies, there's a strong ideological underpinning about the ability to design, own, govern, maintain one's own infrastructure, or to collectively do so, because these are networks. These are not independently operated or governed at all. And so I think that idea is really interesting and important when we're thinking about how people participate in technology, and also technology ownership, governance, power, and some of these themes that align with the questions about ethics and who is actually behind the technology and who is being affected by it. And so some of that work has been published too, which I'm happy to share. The day after I submitted my PhD, I commenced my postdoctoral fellowship at EUI as a Max Weber Fellow, where I'm looking at something slightly different. Accountability is the framing that I took instead of the word ethics, partly due to the fact that many engineers are a bit allergic to the kind of framing of ethics, or kind of see that as adjacent and not specifically embedded in their work. But accountability kind of aligns more with regulatory approaches, and I'm working with Dr. Primavera de Filippi as my mentor on this project. And it's really about this answerability, or the relationship and the interaction between stakeholders affected by a thing or the forum and actors conducting behavior. And so that's very interesting when we start to think about some of these emerging technologies like AI. And so if an AI is operating within a community or an online forum or wherever, who is the actual stakeholder responsible and thus accountable for explaining, how and why a certain behavior was conducted, and, also for bearing any consequences or responsibility for misbehavior. And so the interesting thing about blockchain technology in this regard is that blockchain is undergirded by the idea that the rules are expressed in software code, and thus it's actually characterized by the idea of the absence of accountability. So accountability, because the rules of the code are transparent, verifiable, and cryptographically enforced based on predetermined conditions, you don't really need accountability. And so there are some of the research questions I'm asking. Obviously, blockchain and AI are very distinct and different technologies and research fields. I'm kind of tic-tacking between both at the moment because they're both really interesting. They do somewhat overlap, but not yet in super interesting ways. So I wanted to jump to this slide about different field sites. So despite this underpinning idea, and like I said, I'll focus on blockchain, that there is an absence of the need for accountability. I'm trying to find anomalies in that. So I'm trying to find situations where there are mechanisms that are kind of socially negotiated that somehow interact with the on-chain or software encoded rules and the protocol level enforcement. But in actual fact, accountability is present in certain ways. And so one way I'm looking at that is in relation to the governance of data infrastructure. So looking at data DAOs and how data is collectively managed and governed, and the idea of veto power, which is kind of given to a group of people in a data DAO, which is constructed like a trust. Another place I'm looking at this is in relation to white hat hackers. So a group that is working on kind of a social contract or a pre-agreed agreement between a protocol community and this white hat hacker group or ethical hackers. And so if there is a nefarious exploit, the community has pre-agreed that the white hat hackers can try to exploit that code vulnerability or bug in advance of any attacker, to try and rescue funds pretty much and put them in a safe harbor and give them back to that community once it's safe to do so. So again, this is not about the protocol rules. This is kind of an extra protocol thing, but these accountability mechanisms that sort of are being negotiated and emerging. I'm looking at what crypto democracy means to these communities and how they construct ideas of democracy, and then that different field and different technology of AI, which I mentioned. So some of my very preliminary hypotheses, with the caveat that this is research that is undergoing across those multiple field sites, is around blockchain providing the regulatory layer, so the absence of the need for accountability, yet there's these mechanisms that do emerge, and then these novel accountability mechanisms are innovated. And I guess my goal in this research is to show how, how are they negotiated, what are the kind of social contracts, and then the kind of technical expressions of these in a kind of quote unquote technical context. I will skip this part for the sake of time, or maybe breeze through it. Those are some of my open questions in relation to AI. I touched on some of them before, as in where is it operating, who controls it, who is the actor and who is the forum, and what is the relationships of accountability there. Some of my preliminary hypothesis in regard to AI, and this actually comes from a really fun study that I did on my colleagues at an engineering firm called Block Science, where they decided to deploy a language model within the organization Slack, so the communication channel. And then what I documented, and this is publicly available on SSRN as a working paper, was the actual process of putting guardrails in place about having that AI agent in our team forum. So, how did we, what were the rules of the agent? What data did it have access to? What opt-in or what opt-out choices did people have? What were the kind of, how was that AI constituted? So what was its actual goals and boundaries within that organizational setting? And that really opened up fascinating questions about, well, how would this work in multi-scale forums where, AI is affecting multiple people and it's less clear who has policy-making power and who's in charge and who has deployed AI and so on. There are some pictures that my engineering colleagues did about accountability in AI, which shows that there's stakeholders behind the AI agents. Here is some mapping that I did with my colleague Jacob at Block Science. Again, mapping some of these relationships between the actual technical and social components of an AI deployment and the different stakeholders, internal and external. So just looking at endogenous and exogenous dynamics here. And then